There are recordings that were never meant to be heard. Files locked behind Department of Defense firewalls, tagged with red metadata labels that say things like classified, unauthorized access prohibited. But if you ever stumbled across the raw audio that came from the interstellar object 3I-Atlas on the night of December 14th, 2024, you wouldn't need any label to understand why the government buried it. You'd know instantly that something was wrong, that the sound didn't belong in our solar system, that whatever produced it wasn't just passing through. The clip is only 7 seconds long. 7 seconds of a hollow metallic pulse, rising and falling like a breath, shifting into a pattern too deliberate to be static and too emotional to be mechanical, ending in a distortion that, if you let yourself believe it, sounds almost like a whisper. And once you hear it, once it crawls into your head, you can't unhear it. People who've listened to it say the same thing. It doesn't sound alien. It sounds aware. But the story doesn't begin with that recording. It begins months earlier, before anyone realized that 3I-Atlas was more than another anonymous visitor drifting in from deep space. Back then, it was just a blip near the heliopause, a speck in the data streams coming from the Deep Space Network antenna at Goldstone, California. On October 2nd, the night shift operator, a quiet engineer named Daniel Rush, noticed something strange in the signal logs, tiny spikes riding on top of the usual cosmic microwave hiss. They weren't big enough to trigger an alert. Just little notches, evenly spaced, like someone tapping a metal spoon against the hull of the universe. Daniel marked the anomaly, forwarded the log to an internal folder, and forgot about it. But the spikes didn't forget him. 2 nights later, they returned, longer, stronger, still evenly spaced. When the automated tracking software finally triangulated the source, it pointed toward an object that had only recently been detected by the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii. Its designation was 3I-Atlas, only the 3rd interstellar object ever detected. At first, Daniel thought the radio spikes had to be interference, a glitch, maybe a satellite, maybe stray military transmissions bouncing off the ionosphere. But when he filtered the data, the spikes stayed. When he cross-checked them against catalogs of known radio sources, the spikes stayed. And when he plotted them on a spectrogram, something horrifying happened. The spikes formed a shape, a symmetrical shape, a shape with structure. He sent the spectrogram to his supervisor, who sent it to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, who forwarded it to a handful of radio astronomers in the Northeast, MIT, Harvard, Cornell. And 3 days later, everyone agreed on the same impossible truth. 3I-Atlas was emitting a repeating pattern, not constantly, not predictably, but deliberately. It didn't matter if it was artificial or natural. The deeper truth was worse. The pattern looked like a response. The next step was accidental. On October 11th at 2:14 a.m., one of the Goldstone technicians left a calibration signal running for 16 minutes longer than scheduled. It wasn't intended to reach Atlas. It was just a sweeping frequency pulse used to tune the antenna. Nothing meaningful, nothing encoded. But 3 hours later, Atlas emitted a new series of pulses, faster, sharper, perfectly aligned with the calibration frequency. Daniel stared at the data and felt his hands go cold. Atlas wasn't just making noise, it was answering. That morning, NASA called an emergency remote meeting with JPL, MIT, and Caltech astrophysics leads. They debated for hours. Was the pattern intentional? Was the alignment with the calibration frequency coincidence? Was the object venting, tumbling, shedding material that mimicked communication? But the more they studied the signal, the harder it became to dismiss what they were seeing. Real comets don't adjust their emission patterns to match terrestrial frequencies. They don't reply. They don't wait. Atlas did. 2 days later, on October 13th, the pattern changed again. It stretched out, grew in complexity, resolved itself into a larger structure. a structure that looked eerily similar to a modulation envelope used in early 2000s deep space communication tests. That's when the team at Caltech did something reckless. They pointed a directional beam at Atlas. Not full power, nothing dangerous, just a controlled information packet. A simple binary sequence representing the integers 1 through 10. A test used in exoplanet SETI experiments. Then they waited. 18 hours later, Atlas responded. Not with numbers, not with static. It responded with coordinates. Daniel almost dropped his coffee when he saw them. At first, he thought they pointed toward deep space, maybe another star, maybe an unknown object far beyond the Kuiper Belt. But no, the coordinates weren't for something outside the solar system. They pointed inward, toward us. More specifically, toward a region above the ecliptic plane, far north of the planetary orbital alignment, a region no major object should have occupied. When the calculations came back confirming the trajectory, the room went silent. "It can't be right," one of the MIT analysts said. "There's nothing there." But Daniel felt something else, a chill crawling up his spine, the kind you get when you realize the shadows in your room are shaped wrong. He zoomed the coordinate map, overlaying infrared and gravimetric data, and there it was, a distortion. A faint gravitational lensing effect. Something massive was bending starlight, something they had never catalogued, something heading inward toward the sun. "Check the dates," Daniel whispered. "Check the ephemeris." They checked, and their stomachs dropped. The unidentified object was on a long inbound path, slow, heavy. Decades away, but coming. "What the hell is that?" one of the Caltech astrophysicists asked. No one answered, because the worst part wasn't the object. The worst part was Atlas. It had told them. It had handed them the coordinates, like a warning or a confession. For the next week, the research teams worked non-stop, analyzing the pattern, recalculating the object's trajectory, cross-referencing old sky surveys. Every time they tried to name the object, the label felt wrong. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't an asteroid. And the early estimates of its diameter, if they were right, put it somewhere around 40 miles across. Too big. Too dark. Too quiet. NASA drafted an internal designation, 6K-X LAST. No one liked the name. It felt like a threat. Meanwhile, Atlas kept transmitting, not constantly, not in long messages, just short bursts, pings, pulses, calls, like a lighthouse sweeping the sea. On October 26th at 4:03 in the morning, Atlas sent its longest signal yet, 7 seconds, the same one that would later be classified and buried, the same one that leaked 3 months later. But the scientists didn't know that then. All they knew was that Atlas wasn't behaving like an interstellar rock. It was slowing down as it approached the outer planets. Natural interstellar objects don't slow. They accelerate as they fall toward the sun. But Atlas was braking, steering. A week later, NASA quietly placed several antenna arrays on high-priority tracking. The Pentagon issued silent monitoring orders. And the President of the United States received a classified briefing he reportedly described as unsettling. But in the labs, in Pasadena, in Boston, in Washington, scientists kept working. They isolated the 7-second clip. They fed it through filters. They slowed it down. They sped it up. And then they discovered the part that made one researcher vomit into a trash bin. Embedded inside the metallic pulse was a repeating data structure, a fractal pattern humans had only recently started using in quantum encryption experiments. Atlas wasn't just signaling, it was encoding, communicating with intention. And the coordinates it kept broadcasting weren't drifting, they were getting more precise, zeroing in on XLAST like a spotlight marking a monster in the dark. By mid-November, the story took another turn.
A radio engineer at MIT named Christopher Hale noticed something unsettling in the pulsar timing arrays. Tiny deviations, a wobble in the background timing, almost imperceptible. But Atlas's pulses lined up with those deviations. He's syncing itself to background noise, Hale whispered. It's listening. They didn't know what to do with that. They still don't. On December 12th, Daniel Rush sat alone in the Goldstone control room as Atlas sent another pulse, short, crisp, like a single tap on a submarine hull. He leaned back in his chair and whispered, "What do you want?" Atlas responded. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 more. It was unmistakable, a pattern humans created long ago. Morse code. S, O, S.
Daniel's breath caught in his throat. A message from an interstellar object that had no right to know human communication systems. But before he could react, the signal cut off. Hard. Clean. Like someone had shut a door. 2 days later, Atlas emitted the 7-second recording that would haunt the government for months. It came through every antenna simultaneously: California, New Mexico, Puerto Rico, Maine. Even amateur radio operators in Kansas picked up fragments of it. And on the spectrogram, for the first time, the pulse wasn't symmetrical. It had a drop at the end, a falling edge like a word trailing into silence. That same night, the gravitational distortion linked to X-Last grew stronger. The object was accelerating, not naturally, not gravitationally, as if something were pulling it or waking it. That was when the White House demanded a scenario briefing. NASA gave them one. It didn't help. When Daniel returned home that night, long after midnight, the desert air cold and empty around him, he stepped out of his car and stared up at the sky. Atlas was too small to see. X-Last was too dark to be observed without equipment. But the silence in the night felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like the air before a tornado. He went inside, poured whiskey into a chipped glass, and replayed the 7-second recording on his laptop. He listened once, twice, 10 times. And on the 11th playthrough, he noticed something he hadn't before. At the very end, buried in the distortion, hidden behind the metallic breath, there was another sound. Tiny, choked, almost human. A syllable, a whisper, a word. Run. That was the moment Daniel understood the truth everyone else was too terrified to say out loud. Atlas wasn't here to communicate. It was here to warn us. And whatever X-Last was, whatever enormous, silent thing was falling toward the inner solar system, Atlas feared it. 2 days later, the story of 3I Atlas leaked. Not the audio, not the coordinates, just a headline on a Denver science blog. Interstellar visitor emitting unusual radio patterns. Most people ignored it. The world was busy, distracted. But the scientists weren't. They knew the truth. They knew the danger. And they knew that the signals from Atlas were changing, growing sharper, more frantic as X-Last crawled closer, bending starlight like a fist closing around the solar system. By December 20th, one thing became clear. Atlas wasn't making contact with humanity. It wasn't talking to us. It was trying to get our attention, because something bigger, something far worse, was coming, and Atlas was running out of time. The coordinates from Atlas should have been enough to ignite every government, every observatory, every intelligence agency in the United States, but the truth is more complicated. People don't panic when there's no image, no fireball, no bright streak in the sky to point a camera at. Fear needs something visible. X-Last was the opposite of visible. It was a void inside a void, a region where the stars bent wrong and the infrared background whispered about mass that shouldn't have existed. For the first 4 days after Atlas transmitted the updated coordinates, the JPL team treated the data like a puzzle, not a threat.
The mood in Building 264 in Pasadena was tense, yes, but it wasn't apocalyptic. Not yet. Scientists argued, computer models crashed, graduate students slept on conference room floors, but no one fully grasped what they were looking at because the numbers refused to behave. They weren't linear. They weren't gravitationally consistent. When MIT cosmologist Adrian Reeves ran the orbital regression for XLAST, he frowned, deleted it, recalculated, frowned harder, deleted it again, and finally swore under his breath. "This thing is cheating," he muttered. "Objects don't move like this." But the object was moving toward the inner solar system, moving fast. And every update from Atlas narrowed the coordinates further, as if the interstellar object, this strange intelligence wrapped in metal and dust, was trying to drag human eyes toward something too dark to see unaided. On November 4th, the first shift in attitude occurred. The James Webb Space Telescope, pointed toward the region specified in the last Atlas pulse, captured microlensing spikes that could only be produced by an object with enormous mass, not a moon, not a comet, something heavier than anything that had ever entered the solar system in recorded history. The team stared at the data in silence. Reeves broke it first. "This has to be an error. Webb doesn't get fooled." But Webb wasn't fooled. It was telling the truth. The gravitational signature belonged to something at least 40 times the mass of Halley's Comet and possibly denser. Too dense for ice, too dense for rock, bordering on impossible. NASA issued a covert directive. 6K/XLAST was to be kept off all public-facing logs. Only authorized personnel could access the data. The story, if discovered, would be explained away as calibration noise. But secrets in science rot fast, especially when the universe is moving. A discovery like XLAST cannot be contained because the cosmos itself refuses to cooperate with secrecy. On November 7th, Atlas emitted another burst. Not 7 seconds, not Morse, but a jagged sequence of pulses that hacked into the sidereal timing of the radio array network. The pulses created interference patterns in telescopes across the continental United States, not enough to disrupt observations, but enough to make astronomers notice. And once they noticed, they started digging. That was how Dr. Jenna Morales at Harvard's Center for Astrophysics stumbled across the gravitational anomaly. She cross-referenced the timing disruption with archived data from the Dark Energy Survey and found that something had been quietly distorting light from a background quasar for at least 6 months. Something big, something moving. She called JPL. JPL told her the anomaly was classified. Morales, famously stubborn and famously allergic to bureaucracy, didn't appreciate that answer. She called again, demanded access, refused to hang up until NASA finally relented and sent her a partial data set. They didn't expect her to figure out the truth in less than a day. She did. And when she did, she drove straight to Logan Airport, bought a one-way flight to Los Angeles, and stormed into JPL's visitor lobby without an appointment. Daniel Rush happened to be there, badge in hand, about to scan into the facility when she caught up to him. "You're Rush?" she asked, breathless, exhausted, eyes red from sleeplessness. "The radio engineer from Goldstone?" Daniel blinked. "Yeah, and you are?" "The person who knows what you're hiding," she said. "Let me in." 10 minutes later, Morales stood in Conference Room 3A, surrounded by whiteboards filled with trajectories, plots, energy curves, and spectral analyses. Reeves, Daniel, 2 Air Force representatives, and a grim NASA administrator named Richard Cole stared at her. Morales pointed to the center projection. "You're calling it XLAST, but that's not an object. That's a collapse remnant." Reeves frowned. "A what?" "A fragment from a magnetar collapse, dense as hell, no coma, no albedo. It doesn't reflect light. It drinks it." The room froze. Magnetars are among the most extreme objects in the universe, neutron stars with magnetic fields strong enough to shred atoms. If one collapsed unevenly, fragments might be ejected. But the idea of a fragment surviving the journey across interstellar space was insane. The idea of it entering our solar system was worse. "That's impossible," Daniel said. "There's no evidence." "Yes, there is," Morales cut in. "Look at the lensing pattern. That's not a comet. That's not an asteroid. It's a hyperdense relic." Cole leaned forward. "How dangerous." Morales hesitated. The moment stretched painfully. "If it passes within 2 astronomical units of Earth," she said quietly, "it could disrupt our magnetic field permanently." Reeves swallowed. "Define permanently." "The magnetosphere collapses. Satellites fail. Power grids fry. Everything electrical dies. Civilization falls back to the 1800s best-case scenario." No one spoke. No one breathed. Daniel looked at the Atlas spectrogram glowing on another monitor. "Then why is Atlas warning us?" Morales turned to him. "Because Atlas has seen this before." It didn't make sense. It made too much sense. Atlas wasn't just broadcasting numbers, it was transmitting memory, a map of destruction, a story carved in electromagnetic breath. Reeves rubbed his eyes and muttered, "So Atlas isn't visiting us, it's running from something. Or it's trying to stop something." That was when the Air Force representative spoke up for the first time. "We need to determine if Xlast is changing trajectory." Reeves shook his head. "It shouldn't be." "We know," one of the officers said, "but it is." He clicked a remote. A new graph appeared. Position updates from multiple observatories across the Southwest, plotted over 10 consecutive nights. The data points drifted off the predicted curve. Not much, just enough to show deviation. Reevaluating the orbital model added a chilling note. Xlast was accelerating. "Something that dense shouldn't accelerate," Morales said. "Unless—" She stopped mid-sentence. "Unless it's interacting with external fields." "What kind of fields?" Cole asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "Magnetar fragments shouldn't be stable. They shouldn't act like this. Something is wrong with the physics here." Something was wrong with everything. On November 10th, the mood inside JPL went from anxious to panicked when Atlas altered its own trajectory. It didn't have thrusters, no ion exhaust, no visible propulsion. But its path changed. It shifted by nearly half a degree, too small to matter for a rock, too precise to be natural. Daniel leaned over the console, staring at the updated path. "It's moving toward Xlast." Reeves shook his head. "No, that can't be. That's suicide." "Maybe that's the point," Morales whispered. The next days blurred. No one slept. No one ate properly. The team ran 1,000 simulations. All pointed to the same horrifying conclusion. Atlas wasn't wandering. It was trying to intercept Xlast somewhere near the orbit of Jupiter. But Atlas was too small, too fragile. If it hit Xlast, it would vaporize like a bullet against a battleship. Unless Atlas had a reason to believe that the collision would work. Unless Atlas knew something they didn't. On November 14th, the White House held a classified meeting. NASA, the Air Force, Cyber Command, FEMA, and DARPA attended. Daniel wasn't in the room, but he heard the aftermath. The president ordered the development of a potential defection strategy, though half the advisors agreed privately that nothing humans could build would matter against an object like Xlast. Earth was unprepared for something this massive, and Atlas kept transmitting. On November 17th, the interstellar object released an entirely new kind of burst. Not audio, not pulses, but a dense electromagnetic packet that defied immediate decoding. JPL fed it into the machine learning cluster that handled exoplanet signal deconstruction. The cluster returned an error. Then it returned another. Then it returned something far more unsettling, a partial reconstruction that resembled a series of images encoded as wave interference patterns.
The pictures were blurry, distorted, missing information. But one thing was clear. Atlas had seen worlds destroyed, star systems torn apart, magnetospheres shredded into ribbons of light. And in 3 of the reconstructed images, an object that looked like Xlast drifted across the frame like a dark wound bleeding gravity. Reeves closed the viewer window with shaking hands. "It's a warning," he whispered. "Atlas is warning us what Xlast does." Morales stared at the floor. "No," she said quietly. "It's not just warning us, it's pleading with us." Daniel didn't want to believe it, but he remembered the 7-second audio. He remembered the whisper at the end. He remembered how it sounded like fear. 3 days later, the worst development arrived. Xlast emitted something. Not light, not radio, something deeper. Amateur radio operators in Nevada and New Mexico reported hearing a subaudible rumble, something that shook the ground but didn't register on seismographs. Pilots flying commercial routes over the Midwest reported momentary compass rotation. Birds in Nebraska migrated south 2 months early. Something was waking up. Something was interacting with Earth from millions of miles away. JPL scrambled to calculate the field strength. They failed. The data made no physical sense. When Morales overlaid the field mapping with Atlas's last known trajectory, she went still. "It's reacting," she whispered. "Xlast is reacting to Atlas." Daniel exhaled shakily. "Meaning what?" She said, "It means Xlast knows it's being approached." No one liked that sentence. No one repeated it. But the idea hung in the air like a ghost. On November 22nd, Atlas transmitted again. The burst arrived cleanly, coherently, like a final attempt at clarity. When the data resolved into a coordinate map, everyone leaned forward. Morales froze first. Daniel followed. Reeves swore under his breath. The coordinates weren't for Xlast. They weren't for Earth. They were for a point in space where the trajectories of Atlas and Xlast would intersect in less than 8 months. Atlas was planning something, trying something, attempting something, and Earth was simply watching from the sidelines. On the night of November 24th, Daniel sat outside the JPL complex on a metal bench overlooking the quiet glow of Asadina. The air smelled like dry dust and eucalyptus. He stared up at the stars and tried to find comfort in their permanence. But the stars looked wrong now, bent, tense, like the universe was holding its breath. Morales joined him, sitting beside him without a word. After a minute, she said quietly, "Do you ever get the feeling we're not supposed to survive this?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth sat like a stone in his throat. Atlas had made contact. Atlas had given a warning. And Xlast was coming anyway. That was when Morales showed him something she shouldn't have. She opened her laptop, pulled up an unauthorized data reconstruction. She said, "This is from the last signal. Only my team saw this." The screen showed a waveform, not a message, not a picture, a tremor, a shock, a disturbance in spacetime. "This came from Xlast," Daniel stared. It's singing." Morales nodded. "Low-frequency magnetosonic emission. It's not natural." Daniel felt chills crawling across his arms. "What does it mean?" Morales looked at him with an expression that didn't belong on a scientist's face. It belonged on someone who had seen too much. "It means," she whispered, "that Xlast isn't just coming toward us." She closed the laptop. "It's aware of us." And that was when Daniel realized the truth no one dared to say. Atlas wasn't intercepting Xlast out of duty or strategy or science. It was doing it because humans were in the way, because Atlas knew what Xlast did when it arrived, because Atlas was trying to stop it. And if Atlas failed, Earth would be next. The night grew cold. The sky grew darker. And in the darkness, beyond the planets, beyond the orbit of Neptune, beyond the last trembling arcs of human comprehension, something impossibly massive drifted closer, silent, invisible, hungry. And Atlas, the lone messenger carved from unknown hands in unknown light, raced towards it like a desperate warning shot. In 8 months, their paths would cross. And if Atlas lost, humanity would never see the next sunrise. The morning after Morales showed Daniel the magnetosonic emission, the world outside JPL still looked normal.
traffic humming down the 210, kids in Pasadena walking to school with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders, sunlight washing over the San Gabriel Mountains. Normal, ordinary, painfully fragile. But inside Building 264, nothing was normal anymore. Something had shifted, something irreversible. Every monitor in the control room glowed with new updates from telescopes across the United States. Flagstaff, Kitt Peak, Mauna Kea, Los Alamos, remote observatories feeding a constant stream of data into the servers. Over the course of the night, XLAST had done something no one expected. It brightened. Not visually. XLAST remained a dark object, but in radio wavelengths too low for amateur receivers, too structured to be noise. The signal wasn't communication. It wasn't language. It was a pulse. A rhythmic, oscillating, precise pulse that repeated every 41 minutes. Reeves was the first to speak. "It's not changing trajectory," he whispered, staring at the data. "It's changing state." Morales clenched her jaw. That shouldn't be possible. Magnetostar fragments don't have states. They're dead objects, cold, inactive. But XLAST wasn't acting dead. It was acting alive. Daniel pulled up the frequency spectrogram and isolated the pulse. A pattern emerged. Not symmetrical, not random. Something in between. Like a heartbeat, irregular enough to be biological, but mechanical enough to be engineered. Daniel felt his stomach twist. "Is it reacting to Atlas?" he asked. Morales didn't answer. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew the answer. The Air Force liaison, Major Harris, pushed through the door with a stack of folders. "NASA Director Cole is calling an emergency session. You'll be presenting this." Reeves blinked. "Presenting to who?" "To everyone," Harris said grimly. "White House, Pentagon, NORAD, Presidential Advisory Council, FEMA. They want a full briefing." Morales grabbed the nearest laptop. "We don't have a full briefing. We barely have a theory." "Doesn't matter," Harris said. "They're scared." He hesitated. "They should be." At 11 a.m., the secure conference room filled with faces that belonged on national security briefings, not astrophysics discussions. Generals, intelligence directors, NASA leadership, even a silent representative from the National Security Council wearing a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. Morales presented first. She walked them through the new XLAST pulse, the lensing drift, the magnetosonic emission. She didn't dramatize. She didn't speculate. She presented data the way scientists do. Carefully, methodically, honestly. But the truth didn't need embellishment. It was terrifying on its own. When she finished, the room was dead silent. Finally, the NSC representative spoke. "Dr. Morales," he said, his voice flat and controlled, "what is the likelihood that XLAST is sentient?" Morales stared at him for a long moment. "We don't know," she said, "but based on the emission patterns, it is at least reactive." "Reactive how?" "It senses changes in its environment. It modifies its own field output. It interacts with Atlas's proximity. That's reactive behavior." The representative leaned forward. "Is it hostile?" Morales inhaled slowly. "If it behaves like the objects in Atlas's transmitted images, then yes, entirely." Over the next hour, the discussion deteriorated. The Pentagon wanted to know if XLAST could be destroyed. NASA said no. DARPA suggested remote detonation of nuclear warheads near the object. Morales nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because the suggestion was so absurd that hysteria was the only possible emotional response. A nuclear device wouldn't scratch XLAST. It would vaporize before the shockwave reached the object's surface. Reeves finally lost patience. "We're discussing this like it's a country invading America," he snapped. "This isn't a political threat. This is a cosmological event." "Everything is political," the NSC representative replied coldly.
especially extinction events. The meeting ended with no solution, no consensus, no comfort, just the rising certainty that Xlast wasn't slowing down. It wasn't stopping, it wasn't deviating. And Atlas was racing toward it like a tiny soldier trying to fight a collapsing star. Late in that night, when the building emptied and the security lights flickered on, Daniel stayed behind in the radio control room. He replayed the last Atlas burst, the one that contained the orbital intersection. He slowed the packet down to a crawl. He watched each data block appear like a heartbeat on the screen. He noticed something new, something no one else had seen. Atlas had embedded a second layer of data inside the coordinate packet. Data scrambled by cosmic radiation and distance, but still recoverable. Daniel ran it through a Fourier decomposer. The shape that emerged was simple. Too simple. A circle with a smaller circle inside it. A primitive symbol. He stared. "Morales," he whispered, grabbing the phone. "Get down here." She arrived 7 minutes later, breathless, hair pulled back, expression razor sharp. Daniel pointed at the screen. "Tell me that's not intentional." It was intentional. A message. A glyph. A warning. A representation of Xlast's gravitational field interacting with something smaller. Atlas itself. Earth. It wasn't clear, but the message was undeniable. The collision mattered. The collision meant something. "It's trying to show us," Morales whispered. "What? The impact? Or the result?" Daniel said. And then the signal display flickered. Once. Twice. Then an alert window flashed across the lower right corner. New transmission. Source unknown. Not Atlas. Not Xlast. Something else. Daniel's pulse spiked. Morales leaned forward and hit capture. The signal was faint, erratic, buried in cosmic noise, but it was coming from within the solar system. Daniel isolated the frequency. "This can't be real," he whispered. "It's coming from the Kuiper Belt." "From what?" Morales asked. "There are no transmitters out there, no probes, no stations." But the signal didn't care about what should or shouldn't exist. It pulsed again, stronger this time, like a wounded heartbeat. Morales ran a quick localization. "The source is near 2002 MS4, she said. Daniel stared at her. "That's a dwarf planet?" Morales nodded slowly. "Not exactly the kind of place you'd expect a radio burst." They recorded the pulse. They analyzed it. They failed. The structure wasn't language. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't a distress call. It was chaos. Or it seemed like chaos, just like Atlas's first pulse before they decoded it. Atlas had taught us how to listen. Now something else was speaking. At 2:13 a.m., the Air Force radar picked up a new anomaly. A small object emerging from the direction of the Kuiper Belt signal. It wasn't big, maybe 40 meters across, but it was heating up, accelerating, and heading inward on a trajectory that would intersect Earth's orbit in less than 6 months. "Please tell me this is debris," Daniel said. Morales shook her head. "It's not debris." "Another fragment of Xlast?" "No," she said. "Look." She overlaid the new object's trajectory with Atlas's old path. Perfect match. Identical curvature. Identical deceleration signatures. Daniel backed away from the screen. "That's impossible." Morales whispered. "It's not a fragment. It's a second probe." The universe had sent one messenger. Now it was sending another. And this one wasn't waiting millions of miles away. This one was coming straight to Earth. The next 72 hours were chaos. The president authorized a partial disclosure to high-level military officials across the NATO alliance. Cyber Command activated encryption protocols typically reserved for nuclear threat escalation. ESA confirmed the Kuiper Belt pulse and detected a second signal piggybacked onto it, something like a guidance pattern. Daniel didn't sleep at all.
Neither did Morales. Neither did anyone with access to the classified server. Meanwhile, Xlast continued to brighten in the radio spectrum. Its pulses were now every 38 minutes instead of 41, and each pulse was growing stronger. Something was waking inside it. Something was responding to Atlas's approach. Something was preparing. On December 2nd, JPL finally triangulated the Kuiper Belt probe, unofficially named Object K, and discovered that it was not only accelerating but emitting periodic bursts of data similar to Atlas's early transmissions. But there was a crucial difference. Object K's pulses were not warnings. They were scans.
It was scanning the solar system, mapping, cataloging, searching. For what? Daniel asked. Morales didn't answer. She didn't need to. Everyone knew what the worst-case scenario was. Object K wasn't here to warn about XLAST. Object K was here to confirm something about Earth, or humanity, or both. On the night of December 5th, satellite telemetry from NOOA detected a subtle but measurable deviation in Earth's upper magnetosphere. A micro-distortion, like someone brushing the atmosphere with an invisible finger. Morales analyzed the data and went pale. XLAST caused this, she whispered. It's millions of miles away. How can it influence our magnetosphere? Daniel asked. The same way a magnetar can distort light from across a galaxy, Morales said, by being what it is. The next day, Atlas transmitted again. This time, the transmission wasn't a warning. It wasn't a map. It wasn't even coherent. It was a scream. Not audio, but the closest physical phenomenon to a scream that an alien probe could produce, a violent surge of electromagnetic distortion that overwhelmed half the telescopes in North America for 9 full seconds. 9 seconds of cosmic terror. And inside that distortion was a pattern. Daniel found it at 3:14 a.m., buried so deep in the noise that it took 3 separate filtering algorithms to isolate it. It wasn't an image. It wasn't instructions. It was a timestamp. A countdown. 8 months, Daniel whispered. Atlas will intercept XLAST in 8 months. Morales shook her head. No, not 8 months. 8 months until something. She pointed at the waveform. The countdown doesn't terminate at the collision point. Daniel felt cold. Where does it terminate? Morales swallowed. Earth. That was the moment everything changed. Not when Atlas contacted them. Not when they found XLAST. This was the moment the story broke in half. Because it wasn't just about XLAST entering the solar system, and it wasn't about Atlas trying to stop it. It was about time. A race against a cosmic clock. 8 months until a catastrophic event involving Earth. 8 months to stop something they didn't understand. 8 months before either Atlas succeeded or Earth burned. By the time dawn stretched across Los Angeles, the countdown from Atlas had already been classified under a code name that only 27 people in the entire United States were cleared to know. Project Harborlight. Daniel hated the name immediately. It sounded optimistic, protective, as if the government believed there was still a harbor left to defend. Morales wasn't optimistic at all. She stood in the Situation Room 3 floors beneath JPL's secure lab, staring at the countdown displayed on a military projection screen, arms folded so tightly that the skin at her knuckles whitened. The room was full. NASA leadership, Space Force, Air Force, DARPA, intelligence briefers from Langley, a stern-faced FEMA administrator, and 2 uniformed generals Daniel recognized from televised hearings about missile defense. But today, those men didn't look like masters of the American defense architecture.
They looked like people staring at headlights on a distant highway, realizing too late that the vehicle speeding toward them was bigger than anything the human race had ever prepared for. Morales clicked the remote, and the projection shifted to a three-dimensional model of Atlas's decoded countdown. The termination point is Earth, not XLAST, not interstellar space. Earth. Define termination, a general snapped. Impact event? We don't know, Morales replied. Atlas didn't include a symbol for impact. Just a temporal finish. So it could be nothing, another officer said hopefully. Morales stared at him. If Atlas wanted to tell us the countdown was harmless, Dr. Reeves would not be in a trauma ward right now. Daniel stiffened. Reeves had collapsed earlier that morning, right after seeing the Kuiper Belt probe's new scan. His blood pressure had crashed. He'd suffered a stress-induced seizure. He was alive, but sedated. The room fell silent. The president's science advisor leaned forward. What about Object K? Is it connected to Atlas? Morales took a breath and continued. Object K's emissions have begun to synchronize with Atlas's old pattern from 6 months ago. That means one of two things. Either it's mimicking Atlas, like a repeater, or it's part of the same network. Network? The FEMA administrator asked. As in, multiple probes, multiple Atlas-like devices? Yes, Morales said quietly. And that's assuming Atlas and Object K are even the first wave. We might be intercepting the middle of an ongoing process, not the beginning. So Earth has been, what? Entered into a system? A sequence, Morales said. Something XLAST triggers, something ancient, something intentional. The NSC representative, a man with gray eyes and a voice like sandpaper, leaned back in his chair. Dr. Morales, your projection suggests XLAST has visited other worlds. Daniel spoke for the first time. Not just visited, passed through. Passed through, Harris muttered. As in, destroyed them? Daniel hesitated. The transmission didn't say destroyed, but the wording implied that after XLAST passed, nothing was left. Why? The NSC rep asked. What does XLAST do? Morales shook her head. We don't know. Atlas never transmitted that information. Daniel corrected her softly. Or maybe it did. We just didn't decode it yet. The room tensed. The implications hovered like a silent detonation. Somewhere, something clicked in the walls. Thermostat, ventilation, or maybe just the fabric of the world shifting under their feet. They moved on to contingency planning, but the truth was that nothing they planned felt real. Earth had no defenses against a Magnetar remnant. It didn't matter if it was natural or engineered. It didn't matter if it was a star killer or simply an indifferent phenomenon drifting through space on a schedule written before humanity's ancestors crawled from the oceans. XLAST was coming. Atlas was racing toward it, and now a second probe, Object K, was heading straight for Earth. The countdown had begun. What came next would change everything humanity thought it knew about the universe and about survival. By the time dawn stretched across Los Angeles, the countdown from Atlas had already been classified under a code name that only 27 people in the entire United States were cleared to know: Project Harborlight. Daniel hated the name immediately. It sounded optimistic, protective, as if the government believed there was still a harbor left to defend. Morales wasn't optimistic at all. She stood in the Situation Room 3 floors beneath JPL's secure lab, staring at the countdown displayed on a military projection screen, arms folded so tightly that the skin at her knuckles whitened. The room was full: NASA leadership, Space Force, Air Force, DARPA, intelligence briefers from Langley, a stern-faced FEMA administrator, and 2 uniformed generals Daniel recognized from televised hearings about missile defense. But today, those men didn't look like masters of the American defense architecture. They looked like people staring at headlights on a distant highway, realizing too late that the vehicle speeding toward them was bigger than anything the human race had ever prepared for. Morales clicked the remote, and the projection shifted to a three-dimensional model of Atlas's decoded countdown. The termination point is Earth, not XLAST, not interstellar space. Earth. Define termination, a general snapped. Impact event? We don't know, Morales replied. Atlas didn't include a symbol for impact. Just a temporal finish. So it could be nothing, another officer said hopefully. Morales stared at him. If Atlas wanted to tell us the countdown was harmless, Dr. Reeves would not be in a trauma ward right now. Daniel stiffened. Reeves had collapsed earlier that morning, right after seeing the Kuiper Belt probe's new scan. His blood pressure had crashed. He'd suffered a stress-induced seizure. He was alive, but sedated. The room fell silent. The president's science advisor leaned forward. What about Object K?
Is it connected to Atlas? Morales took a breath and continued. Object K's emissions have begun to synchronize with Atlas's old pattern from 6 months ago. That means one of two things. Either it's mimicking Atlas, like a repeater, or it's part of the same network. Network? The FEMA administrator asked. As in multiple probes? Multiple Atlas-like devices? Yes, Morales said quietly. And that's assuming Atlas and Object K are even the first wave. We might be intercepting the middle of an ongoing process, not the beginning. So Earth has been, what, entered into a system? A sequence, Morales said. Something XLAST triggers. Something ancient. Something intentional. The NSC representative, a man with gray eyes and a voice like sandpaper, leaned back in his chair. Dr. Morales, your projection suggests XLAST has visited other worlds. Daniel spoke for the first time. Not just visited, passed through. Passed through, Maris muttered. As in, destroyed them? Daniel hesitated. The transmission didn't say destroyed, but the wording implied that after XLAST passed, nothing was left. Why? The NSC rep asked. What does XLAST do? Morales shook her head. We don't know. Atlas never transmitted that information. Daniel corrected her softly. Or maybe it did, and we just didn't decode it yet. The room tensed. The implications hovered like a silent detonation. Somewhere, something clicked inside the walls. Thermostat, ventilation, or maybe just the fabric of the world shifting under their feet. They moved on to contingency planning, but the truth was that nothing they planned felt real. Earth had no defenses against a magnetar remnant. It didn't matter if it was natural or engineered. It didn't matter if it was a cosmic predator or simply an indifferent phenomenon drifting through space on a schedule written before humanity's ancestors crawled from the oceans. XLAST was coming. Atlas was trying to stop it, and Object K, whatever it was heading straight toward them. Around noon, a private jet brought 2 additional scientists to JPL under armed escort. One was Dr. Elaine Archer from Cornell, an expert in cosmic neutrino anomalies. The other was Dr. Michael Byrne, a physicist who had once written a paper proposing that magnetar remnants might retain structural coherence capable of artificially influencing gravity over short distances. The paper had been mocked by the academic community. His career had nearly ended. Today, the Pentagon had flown him to California and shaken his hand. Byrne stepped toward Daniel in the lab. His eyes were sunken, but sharp. You're the one who decoded the glyph. Daniel nodded. We think it's showing the interaction between a small field and a larger one, possibly Atlas and XLAST. Possibly Earth and XLAST, Byrne said. His voice cracked slightly. May I? Daniel stepped aside. Byrne studied the image like a doctor examining an X-ray of a critical patient. If I'm right, he murmured,
This glyph isn't warning of a collision. It's warning of absorption. Daniel felt his pulse trip. Absorption of what? Earth's magnetic domain. Byrne tapped the inner circle. This smaller field collapses into the larger one, not physically, energetically. Daniel stared at the image until it blurred. Xlast is going to peel off our magnetosphere? Or convert it, Byrne whispered. We don't know the mechanism. And then what? Byrne swallowed. Then Earth is no longer shielded from solar wind or cosmic radiation. Our atmosphere collapses. Oceans boil off in a few years. Life ends. Daniel felt like he was falling. So, Xlast is a star killer? No, Byrne said. Xlast is something worse. It's a system killer. News didn't leak, not to the public. Security levels were too high. But word slipped like steam through cracks. JPL employees whispered. Technicians avoided eye contact. Even janitors seemed to sense the tension vibrating in the walls. And then the trembling started. Not literal tremors, no earthquakes, but a subtle rhythmic flicker in every magnetic sensor across the western United States. It came every 38 minutes, exactly matching Xlast's pulse, 57 pulses. By the next night, 70. Its strength doubled, then tripled. Object K accelerated, then its pulse synchronized with Xlast perfectly. That was the moment Daniel realized something horrifying. Object K wasn't scanning Earth, it was surveying a target. Object K was marking Earth for Xlast. The next morning, at 4:26 a.m., a new signal arrived. Strong, coherent. Not from Atlas, not from Object K. It was Xlast. Xlast transmitted. Daniel woke in the lab with alarms blaring. Morales sprinted inside. Her hair was uncombed, her eyes were wild. Xlast sent something, she said breathlessly. Something directed. Daniel's hands shook as he pulled the raw signal. The waveform was jagged, violent, as if the universe itself had screamed directly into our receivers. It's not language, Daniel murmured. It's instruction. Instruction for what? We need to decode it. We need to... But he stopped mid-sentence. Because the message wasn't encoded. It wasn't hiding behind layers. It wasn't compressed. It was simple, terrifyingly simple. It was coordinates. Earth's exact cosmic coordinates. As if Xlast needed to remind itself where its next target was. But there was another layer. Daniel slowed the signal. A faint modulation. A pattern he'd seen once before. In Atlas's earliest transmissions. It's a mirror, he whispered. Xlast is sending back a reflection of Atlas's first message. Morales froze. Why? Daniel isolated it. Played it aloud and heard rising from the speakers the quiet, artificial ghost of Atlas's first pulse, its warning about worlds that had fallen before. Except the message was twisted, reversed, corrupted, warped into something else, something darker. Atlas had said, not the first. Xlast now said, not the last. Morales took a step back. It's taunting us. Or warning them that resistance was futile, or simply stating a fact. And then Object K transmitted again. But this time it didn't send data. It sent imagery. Blurred, fragmentary, but unmistakable. A planet. Blue, green, cloud-streaked. A living world, and then a flash, white, blinding, followed by static. The implication was deafening. Xlast had consumed other Earth-like worlds, and Object K had witnessed it. Object K wasn't a scout. Object K was a recorder, a witness probe. Then something happened that none of their models predicted. Atlas changed trajectory. It's turning, Daniel whispered. But why? Morales studied the graph. It's abandoning the intercept path. Abandoning? Daniel echoed. Then where is it going? Morales zoomed out the projection. Atlas's new trajectory diverged sharply from Xlast's path. It swung wide, toward the inner system, toward Earth. No, Daniel whispered. No, no, no. But there it was. Atlas was coming toward Earth, and it was accelerating. Why would Atlas come here? Morales asked. We're not its target. Daniel stared at the map. Not its target. Its last chance. Morales frowned. What does that mean? Daniel swallowed. It's coming here to deliver something. Information? Or instructions? For what? Daniel stared at the simulation screen, at Earth, at Object K, at Xlast approaching like a slow, inevitable storm, and finally understood. Instructions on how to survive. The room fell silent. Silent except for the soft, distant hum of systems they no longer trusted to protect them. Morales leaned closer. If Atlas is coming here, it means it doesn't believe it can stop Xlast. Or, Daniel whispered, or it already failed somewhere else. Atlas's acceleration increased. Earth was now 212 days from the countdown termination. Xlast's pulse shortened again, now every 36 minutes. This time, the pulse was strong enough to disrupt GPS satellites across the Western Hemisphere for 6 full seconds. Flights grounded, communications jammed, power grids flickered. Atlas transmitted again, a broken, fractured signal. Daniel caught one fragment, a single glyph, a spiral collapsing inward, then cutting to black. What does it mean? Morales asked. Daniel didn't breathe for a long moment. We're running out of time.
The next morning brought something worse, much worse. Xlast shifted its orientation, not its trajectory, its face, as if turning toward Earth from millions of miles away, as if it could see them, as if it had always seen them. And for the first time since its discovery, Xlast emitted not a pulse, but a tone. Low, oscillating, almost melodic, a single note resonating across the void. It lasted 43 seconds, and when it ended, every magnetic sensor on Earth registered the same thing. A fluctuation, a ripple, as if space itself tightened for a moment, as if Xlast had exhaled. Daniel stared at the readout with dread creeping up his spine like cold water. "What is it doing now?" he whispered. Morales answered with a voice so quiet it barely existed. "It's warming up." Atlas was coming. Object K was closing in. Xlast was accelerating its pulses. Earth's magnetosphere was already beginning to fluctuate in microbursts, and the countdown continued. 212 days, 211, 210. And in the quiet hours just before dawn, when JPL was nearly empty and the night was too still, the radio array picked up something Atlas had never done before. A voice. Synthetic. Broken. Artificial. A whisper. A message carried on dying circuitry stretched across millions of miles. Daniel listened alone in the dark as the message crackled through the speakers. Prepare for breach. Atlas had spoken, and whatever Xlast was, whatever it intended, Earth was next. Atlas's voice, if it could be called a voice, haunted the lab long after the speakers went silent. Prepare for breach. 3 words: broken, destabilized, warped by cosmic distance and a device that was clearly dying, yet somehow those words sounded more human than anything Xlast had ever sent. They felt like the last breath of something that understood fear. Morales played the clip 15 times before finally muttering, "Breach of what? Breach by what? Atmospheric? Magnetic? Structural? Spatial?" Daniel didn't answer, because deep down he already knew.
Breach meant the moment X-last reached a threshold, some invisible boundary in physics that Earth was never meant to cross unharmed. And the countdown had been leading to that exact point. 210 days left. Over the next week, Earth shifted from quiet concern to classified crisis management. The White House Situation Room became a second home for NASA's senior scientists. JPL moved key personnel into temporary housing on site. The Air Force established orbital monitoring protocols that ran non-stop. And through it all, Atlas kept accelerating toward Earth, while X-last kept pulsing through the void like the heartbeat of a dying god. Object K, now only 10 weeks away, continued scanning the inner system, mapping every magnetic contour of Earth's upper atmosphere, as if preparing blueprints for whatever X-last intended to do. Morales became convinced that Object K wasn't just a witness probe, it was a synchronizer, an instrument meant to align Earth's magnetic field for X-last's arrival, like tuning a piano before a performance no one wanted to hear. During a midnight session in the Secure Analytics Lab, Morales suddenly stiffened. She whispered, "Look at this," and dragged Daniel to her monitor. She had overlaid the last 30 pulses from X-last into a three-dimensional model. The waveforms weren't random. They weren't warning signals. They were instructions. Spatial instructions. "It's mapping the collapse," she whispered. "The collapse of what?" Daniel asked. "Our magnetosphere." The model showed Earth's field lines bending inward, drawn like threads toward a dark central point that represented X-last. It wasn't an impact. It was a siphon. X-last wasn't coming to destroy Earth by force. It was coming to drink Earth's magnetic field dry. A feeding mechanism. A cosmic parasite. "If X-last drains the magnetosphere," Morales said, voice trembling, "Earth's surface will be sterilized in less than 5 years. Radiation levels will skyrocket, DNA meltdown across all species, mass death. Oceans begin evaporating. Civilization collapses." Daniel stared at the model, feeling the weight of extinction settle into his bones. "Can Atlas stop it?" Morales shook her head slowly. "Atlas couldn't stop this even if it were fully functional, and Atlas is nearly dead." But Atlas wasn't giving up. By mid-December, the interstellar object had altered course 3 more times, each adjustment more erratic than the last. It was burning through whatever propulsion system it had left. The closer it came to Earth, the weaker its signal became, distorted, cracked, degrading like an old radio on the edge of failure. Meanwhile, Object K stopped scanning and began broadcasting. Short bursts, repeating, identical. Daniel recognized the structure immediately. He whispered, "It's a beacon for X-last. Object K is locking onto Earth and transmitting its signature." "Like a lighthouse guiding a shipwreck," Morales murmured. X-last's pulses shortened again, now every 34 minutes. And with each pulse, the micro-distortions in Earth's magnetosphere grew stronger. Power fluctuations hit parts of the Midwest. Birds flew in circles, unable to orient. Compasses spun. Aurora-like glows appeared faintly over Phoenix, even though Phoenix shouldn't have auroras. And somewhere, above the clouds, the International Space Station experienced its first-ever full magnetic field blackout for 3 terrifying seconds. Then, on December 19th, Atlas transmitted again, but this time not through radio, through gravity. Sensors in New Mexico, Chile, and Japan all recorded a minute but measurable gravitational tremor, localized, artificial, unmistakably intentional. Atlas had shifted from electromagnetic communication to gravitational messaging because its radio systems were failing. And encoded inside the gravitational tremor was another glyph. A spiral. But unlike the one warning of collapse, this one had an extension, a branching line, a deviation, a possible escape path.
or a maneuver. The room at JPL filled with frantic energy. Daniel and Morales worked through the night decoding the glyphs through a mixture of mathematics, simulation, guesswork, and instinct. Just before dawn, Morales slammed her hand on the desk. She whispered, "I got it." The glyph wasn't showing how Earth could survive. It was showing how Atlas might stop Xlast, not by collision, but by destabilizing its interior structure. "Xlast isn't solid," Morales said, pointing to a hollow region near the core. "It's a shell around something else, something the Magnetar remnant left behind. If Atlas hits the shell at the precise vector shown here, it might initiate a collapse cascade." "A what?" Daniel asked. "A chain reaction that forces Xlast to disperse its magnetic field outward instead of inward, a self-destruct triggered by overloading its own compression." Daniel stared in awe. "Can Atlas stop Xlast?" Morales whispered, "Maybe. If Atlas had full strength, if it weren't dying, if its propulsion weren't failing, if its structure weren't cracked, if—" She stopped. "Atlas will try anyway." And it did. 3 days later, Atlas reached the orbit of Mars. Every telescope that could track it, public or classified, was pointed at its faint metallic glint. It was smaller than anyone expected, scarred, fragmented, like something that had survived 1,000 collisions already and was preparing for one final impossible task. Xlast, still far beyond Jupiter's orbit, emitted another tone. This one wasn't low frequency. It wasn't rhythmic. It was a roar. A gravitational scream that rattled the magnetosphere enough to make the auroras turn blood red over Alaska and ripple like torn curtains across the night sky. Planes grounded instantly. Satellites threw errors. The White House initiated a preemptive continuity of government protocol. But none of it mattered. Humanity had no control over what was coming. Atlas began its final acceleration burn. Its speed increased to levels no one could explain, as if some hidden engine deep within it had awakened for one last sacrifice. But the new acceleration vector wasn't aimed directly at Xlast's core. It was angled slightly, exactly matching the deviation path in the glyph. Morales's voice trembled as she verified the alignment. Atlas is aiming for the weak point. Xlast noticed. Its pulses spiked, 31 minutes, then 30, then 27, each faster than the last.
Pulses so strong they warped Earth's magnetic readings globally. Then, at 4:17 p.m. Pacific Time, Xlast emitted a burst strong enough to knock out power to half of San Diego for 9 minutes. Daniel stared at the screen. "It's trying to stop Atlas." "It can't," Morales whispered. "Atlas is too close." And then Object K, only days from Earth, transmitted one last time. Not a scan, not a map, a warning, but not for Earth, for Xlast. A sharp, urgent, staggered burst. Xlast reacted instantly. Its orientation shifted. Its pulse devolved into chaotic spasms. Daniel watched the telemetry spike wildly. "It's panicking," he whispered. And no one had ever imagined a Magnetar remnant could panic. 3 days left. Atlas's systems degraded further. Its transmissions became garbled. In its last coherent burst, it sent a single repeated phrase, this time not twisted or broken, but clear, deliberate, haunting. "We will try." Daniel sat in the dark lab after everyone else had gone home, listening to those words on repeat, feeling the weight of helplessness crush him. Humanity could do nothing. Only Atlas could. And Atlas was dying. The final day arrived without ceremony, without warning, without hope. Xlast loomed large in every simulation screen, its gravitational lensing so powerful it distorted star fields behind it like molten glass. Atlas, small and flickering, approached the intercept point on a curved path that looked suicidal from every angle. JPL, NASA, the White House, all secured direct feeds from telescopes worldwide. The entire scientific community became an audience, unable to intervene, forced to watch a cosmic battle between a dying messenger and a star-killing anomaly. Atlas reached the optimal vector, 100,000 miles from Xlast, 50,000, 20. Then Atlas emitted a final burst. Not radio, not gravity, light. A blinding flare like a dying star, bright enough that even backyard telescopes caught it as a tiny flash. "It's burning itself out," Morales whispered, pushing everything it has into one final maneuver. 10,000 miles, 5,000, 1,000, then impact. Atlas struck Xlast's weak point with the force of a collapsing moon. No sound, no fireball, just a flash, a ripple, a distortion in space-time so intense that telescopes temporarily lost tracking. For 7 full seconds, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then Xlast convulsed, not physically, magnetically. Its shell cracked. A shock wave expanded outward like a collapsing bubble of darkness. Xlast's interior field destabilized. The chain reaction began. Xlast tore itself apart from the inside, not explosively, beautifully, like ink dissolving in water, like a storm unraveling, like the universe reclaiming what it never meant to release. The collapse lasted 29 seconds. When it ended, Xlast was gone, vanished into a diffuse cloud of exotic particles that quickly faded into cosmic background noise. Atlas, of course, did not survive. Its fragments scattered into a glittering arc of debris that drifted silently through space like a memorial made of shattered metal and hope. Earth shuddered, literally, as the last pulse from Xlast washed across the magnetosphere. But the field held. The auroras faded. Compasses stabilized. Birds stopped flying in circles. And the countdown ended. Humanity had survived. Barely. But survival carried a price. 2 days after the destruction of Xlast, fragments of Atlas began drifting past Earth's orbit. Most were inert metal, dust, or exotic alloys that no human scientist could identify. But one fragment, just one, transmitted a signal as it passed through the upper atmosphere. Daniel caught it by accident while recalibrating the Goldstone array. The signal was faint, weak, almost fading, but real. He isolated it, cleaned it, amplified it, and heard Atlas's final message. 3 words: "Not alone. Prepare." The transmission ended, and in the quiet that followed, Daniel realized Atlas had never been sent to save one world. It had been sent to warn many. Xlast had been only one threat, one remnant, one shard, one feeder. There were others, somewhere, drifting, waiting, falling. Earth had been spared, for now, but Atlas's final words meant the story was not over. It had only begun.